The scroll was never supposed to be found. At least, that's what the old caretaker told us when he nervously handed over the dust-coated wooden box, his hands shaking as if he already regretted showing it to us. We had gone to the hillside ruins searching for simple footage, something to add atmosphere to our documentary about forgotten settlements. But instead of abandoned stones and faded carvings, we walked into a story that had been waiting almost 2,000 years to be told. From the moment we unlatched the box and saw the fragile roll of parchment inside, everything changed. And none of us were prepared for what was written on it. It began with a single line in uneven ink, so faint we had to angle the scroll under the sunlight to read it. The words didn't sound like a formal record or a religious text. They sounded like a person whispering across time, desperate to make sure someone, anyone, heard the truth. The writer claimed to be an eyewitness to the crucifixion, someone who had not only seen it happen but believed the world should know what really occurred in those final hours. We looked at each other, unsure if it was real or some ancient attempt at storytelling. But the tone, the detail, the fear in the handwriting, it felt too human to be invented. The more we read, the quieter we became. The scroll didn't try to dramatize anything. It didn't use poetic language or grand declarations. It felt like someone writing down their memories before they were lost forever. Someone who had watched history unfold from the edge of a crowd and carried the weight of it for the rest of their life. And according to the date written at the top, this person had lived in the same century the event took place. That alone made our hearts race. If it was real, this wasn't just a discovery, it was one of the most important historical documents ever found. But there was something strange too. Parts of the scroll seemed rushed, almost washed out, as if the writer had been looking over their shoulder while writing. Some lines broke off halfway, followed by sudden changes in tone. It felt like they were afraid someone would find them. Every time they mentioned certain figures or described certain moments, the handwriting grew smaller, the spacing tighter, as if their hand had started trembling. And then there were the repeated phrases, warnings almost, telling the reader to understand the risk of reading further. We argued about what it meant, but none of us wanted to stop. The caretaker who found us in the ruins refused to explain how he discovered the box. He wouldn't even step near it once we opened it. He only said one sentence, and the way he said it made the hair on my arms rise. Some stories were sealed for a reason. After that he left, walking away quickly, refusing to look back. We didn't chase after him. We were too focused on the scroll, too curious to let fear distract us. As we continued reading, we began to notice small shifts in the writer's wording. They described the city as tense, crowded, on edge. They claimed strange rumors were spreading among the people, whispers of signs in the sky, unusual movements in the streets, and tension among the authorities. But the writer insisted that what truly haunted them was not the events leading up to the crucifixion, but what happened right after. They hinted at something that made them flee the city and never return. Something they believed was dangerous to speak about openly. We debated whether the writer had been exaggerating or influenced by fear, but the deeper we went into the scroll, the more convinced we became that this was not just a simple eyewitness account. It felt like someone trying to leave behind a warning. Someone who saw not only what the world remembers, but also something the world was never supposed to know. One detail kept repeating, a mysterious figure the writer called the man with the covered face. According to the scroll, this person was present at every major moment leading up to the event. They stood quietly at the back of crowds, observed the officials, and even exchanged words with soldiers. No one else seemed to notice him, but the writer claimed that this figure was watching everything, as if recording it in his own mind. The writer feared him deeply. They believed he had followed them, that he knew they were taking notes, and that he didn't want the scroll to exist. We still don't know if the writer was paranoid or if the man with the covered face was a real person. But the way the writer described him felt too specific, too consistent, like a memory burned into someone's mind. And every time the figure was mentioned, the handwriting became hurried, as if the writer was trying to get the words out before something interrupted them. The scroll ended abruptly, not with a farewell, not with a conclusion, but with a line that stopped mid-sentence, as if the writer had been forced to put the pen down. Or worse. The last readable words were, "If anyone finds this, be careful who you trust." He is still, and then nothing. No signature. No date. No explanation. After finishing the scroll, we sat in silence. None of us knew what to think. Was it real? Was it a warning? Was it an ancient story written by someone frightened of the world around them? Or was it something else? Something that hinted at a forgotten piece of history that had been buried for centuries? We decided the only way to understand the truth was to investigate every detail mentioned in the scroll, from the landscapes to the names to the strange figure who appeared again and again. But the strangest part came later that night, long after we left the ruins. When we replayed our footage, we noticed something none of us had seen while filming. In one frame, far behind us near the edge of the ruins, stood a tall figure wearing something that covered most of his face. He wasn't moving. He wasn't blurred like someone walking by. He was standing completely still, as if watching us. We froze the frame. Then we zoomed in. And that's when we realized the scroll might not just be a story from the past. It might be connected to something still happening now. And that's where our journey begins. When we got back to our temporary workspace that night, none of us spoke for a long time. The room felt smaller than before, like the air itself had thickened. The scroll lay in the center of the table, still partially rolled, its edges trembling whenever the fan in the corner shifted the air. No one wanted to touch it again, but no one wanted to look away either. It felt like an object that could change everything, yet none of us knew what that actually meant. I replayed the footage again, pausing at the exact moment the figure appeared in the background. Even though the image was grainy and distant, something about his stillness didn't feel normal. People walking past ruins usually glance around or adjust their steps. But this man stood perfectly straight, his head slightly tilted, as if listening. The cloth covering his face blended into the shadows, and the more I stared at it, the more uneasy I felt. It reminded me too much of the way the writer described him. Calm, silent, watching. When I showed the others, their reactions told me everything. Sam leaned closer, his face tightening. Nadia pressed a hand to her mouth. Even Jonah, who always tried to stay rational, swallowed hard before looking away. No one said the words out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. What if the figure in our footage wasn't a coincidence? Jonah finally broke the silence, clearing his throat in that way he did when he was trying to sound steady. It could be a tourist, he said, though his voice didn't sound sure. Or someone working near the site. Maybe he just wandered into the frame. But he wasn't there earlier, Nadia said quietly. I looked around. I swear I didn't see him. Her voice shook slightly, and I could tell she was replaying the scene in her mind, searching for anything she might have missed. Sam started pacing, running his finger along his jaw like he always did when nerves got the best of him. What if someone followed us? He muttered. The caretaker was acting weird. Maybe he wasn't supposed to show us the scroll. Maybe someone's watching him too. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but a part of me wondered the same thing. The caretaker's uneasy eyes, the sudden way he backed away from the box, the way he warned us without explaining anything, it all felt connected. And now this figure appeared behind us without making a sound. We didn't sleep much that night. Every noise outside the windows made us sit up and listen. Every passing car sounded like someone stopping in front of the building. But the worst part wasn't the fear of being watched. It was the fear of not knowing what we were dealing with. Were we reading too much into the situation? Or had the scroll brought us into something bigger than we understood? The next morning, we decided to go through the scroll again, this time with more attention to detail. Nadia brought a small brush to clear away dust without damaging the parchment. Sam handled the lighting, adjusting it so the faded ink became clearer without exposing it to too much heat. Jonah took notes, jotting down every name, every place, every moment that seemed unusual. I read aloud, though my voice shook each time the writer mentioned the man with the covered face. As we went deeper into the middle section of the scroll, something new caught our attention. The writer mentioned a place outside the city, small, hidden, rarely visited. They described it as a hillside cave where a group of people gathered to share information they couldn't safely speak in public. According to the scroll, this was where the writer learned things that frightened them enough to start recording their memories in secret. There was no exact location, only a description of the view from the entrance. A valley stretching wide, dotted with olive trees, and a narrow path that twisted down toward a river. It sounded vague, but something about it matched the area we had been filming earlier. Nadia pointed out that the region had several caves in its surrounding hills, some barely explored. Sam suggested we go back and look around. But Jonah hesitated. What if the figure we saw is connected to that cave? He asked. What if we're walking into something we don't understand? He wasn't wrong. The scroll hinted at dangerous information. Whispers of corruption, hidden motives, people working in secret. The writer didn't accuse anyone directly, but the tone made it clear they were afraid of being silenced. If the man with the covered face was real, maybe he wasn't just a witness. Maybe he had his own reason to keep the writer quiet. Still, curiosity had a hold on us. It pulled us forward, pushing past the fear. We needed to see the place the writer described. Not just for the story, but because something deep inside us needed to know whether the past was trying to warn the present. We headed back to the ruins in the late morning, the sunlight harsh against the stones. The caretaker wasn't there this time. The entrance gate hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Sam muttered that it was strange, but we pushed forward, scanning the area carefully. I kept glancing behind us, expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing except the sound of wind brushing against the old walls. When we reached the ridge overlooking the valley, the view struck us all at once. The description on the scroll was almost exact. The olive trees, the winding path, the shimmering line of the river, it all matched. And then we saw it, a small dark opening near the base of the hill, almost hidden behind tangled brush. A cave. We stood there staring. It felt like stepping into one of the writer's memories. Jonah finally exhaled and said, "If the writer met people here, if this place was used to share secrets, then there might be more." We approached slowly. Birds scattered from the branches as we moved the brush aside to reveal the entrance. The opening wasn't wide, maybe enough for one person at a time, but it led into darkness. Sam flicked on his flashlight and swept the beam across the stone walls. Carvings. Scratches. Marks that didn't look natural. They were faint, weathered by time, but they formed shapes and lines that reminded me of coded messages or signals. As if someone wanted to leave traces for those who knew how to read them. We stepped deeper, our footsteps echoing softly. The temperature dropped, and the air smelled old, untouched. The cave wasn't big, but it opened into a small chamber with what looked like a flat stone in the center. On it lay broken pottery, ashes, and something that made my skin prickle. A piece of parchment, crumbled and nearly unreadable. It wasn't as old as the scroll, but it wasn't new either. Nadia picked it up carefully. Only a few words survived, but they chilled us. "He watches." The ink was darker than the scrolls, maybe written centuries later. Or maybe, more recently. Suddenly a sound echoed from outside. A soft crunch like footsteps on gravel. We froze, staring at each other. Sam switched off his flashlight. The cave went dark. We held our breath, listening. Another sound. Closer. Slow. Purposeful. Nadia whispered, "Is someone?" But she didn't finish. Because whatever, or whoever, was outside the cave began moving toward the entrance. Steady. Calm. Like they already knew we were in there. And that was when we realized the past wasn't the only thing following us. The present was too. The footsteps outside the cave stopped so suddenly that the silence felt heavier than the sound itself. None of us dared to breathe. Sam's hand pressed against my arm, steady but tense, like he was ready to pull me back if anything happened. The narrow entrance let in only a thin slice of daylight, and in that faint glow, we could see a shadow, long, unmoving, resting just beyond the threshold. For a moment, I wondered if it was just an animal or maybe the wind shifting the brush. But then the shadow shifted slightly, too smoothly, too deliberately, the way a person might lean forward to listen more closely. My heart hammered, and I sensed everyone else was feeling the same rush of fear. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They knew exactly where we were. We kept still. Seconds stretched like minutes. Finally, the shadow backed away. We heard soft gravel crunching again, this time fading instead of approaching. The figure, if it was the same one, seemed to be leaving. But none of us trusted it. We waited until the footsteps vanished completely before Sam dared flick his flashlight back on. The cave walls lit up again, revealing the stone table and the small scatter of ancient remains. But now it all felt different, like the space had shifted from curiosity to threat. Nadia still held the small fragment of parchment with the words, "He watches," and now it felt like a warning directed straight at us. "We need to get out," Jonah whispered, his voice tight but steady. "Now. Before whoever that was comes back." We didn't argue. We didn't gather anything. We slipped out of the cave one by one, staying low, listening for any sound. The hillside looked empty, peaceful even, but our nerves were too shot to appreciate it. Every rustle of leaves sounded like someone hiding. Every shift of sunlight looked like a shape moving. By the time we reached the ridge, each of us kept glancing behind us, expecting to see the figure appear again. Back at the ruins, we didn't stop walking until we reached the car. Sam checked the back seat twice before unlocking the doors. Once inside, the tension eased a little, but none of us relaxed fully. As we drove away, the ruins shrank behind us, yet the feeling of being watched refused to fade. When we returned to the workspace, the first thing we did was check our camera equipment. We reviewed the footage from the ruins, the hillside, even the walk to the cave entrance, but there was nothing new. No figure. No movement. Just us. It almost made things worse. The absence felt intentional, like the person outside the cave had known how to avoid being seen. Jonah sat down heavily, rubbing his face. "This is getting bigger than a historical discovery," he said quietly. If someone doesn't want this story uncovered, who are they? And how long have they been watching? Nadia placed the He Watches parchment on the table next to the scroll. We don't know if it's the same person, she said, though her voice didn't sound convinced. Could be some local keeping an eye on the area. Maybe people are protective about the ruins. But then why hide? Sam muttered. Why stand completely still like that? He had a point. If it had been a local, they would have said something, asked questions, warned us, anything. The stillness, the covered face, the quiet footsteps. It matched the scroll's descriptions too closely to ignore. As the day went on, we tried to distract ourselves with work. We began organizing our notes from the scroll, matching names and places with research material we'd gathered. The scroll mentioned several groups of people who lived on the outskirts of the city at the time. Merchants, travelers, families caught between political tensions. There were hints of unrest, rumors of secret meetings, and descriptions of people who held influence from the shadows. The writer spoke of them carefully, never naming them directly but always hinting at their presence. One passage described a man who spoke softly yet carried authority. Another described a woman who kept coded messages hidden in plain sight. These details didn't tie directly into the crucifixion itself, but they painted a picture of a city full of fear and divided power. A city where someone like the man with the covered face could move freely without raising suspicion. We began to realize that the main conflict wasn't just the writer's fear, it was the world around them. A world full of tension, secrecy, and people trying to control what stories were allowed to survive. The writer might have been just one voice caught in a larger conflict that has echoes even now. But as we pieced together the past, something in the present pulled us back. That night, while reviewing our audio recordings, Nadia frowned and leaned closer to her laptop screen. Guys, she said softly, come listen to this. We gathered around her. She played a clip from the cave entrance. It sounded normal at first. Wind, footsteps, us talking quietly. Then, underneath it, almost impossible to detect unless you were listening for it, came a faint sound. Not footsteps. Not breathing. More like a slow, steady rhythm. A tapping. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. Jonah straightened. Is that some kind of signal? It wasn't us, Nadia said, eyes wide. I checked every clip. It's only in this one. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The tapping didn't sound threatening on its own, but the timing, the moment when someone was outside the cave, made it impossible to ignore. Was it communication? A warning? Or something more calculated? Sam grabbed his notebook and started flipping through it. Wait, there was something on the cave wall. Those scratching marks. They were grouped in 3s. 3 lines. 3 more. Almost like a pattern. Do you think they're connected? Nadia asked. I don't know, he said. But it feels like whoever was using that cave had a system. We started looking deeper into the scroll, hoping the writer mentioned anything resembling coded patterns or signals. There was a small note near the end where the writer said certain people communicated without speaking to avoid drawing attention. They used gestures, symbols, or simple rhythms. The writer didn't describe them clearly but said they were meant to warn, not explain. That made the tapping even more unsettling. Warn about what? And why now? As night fell, the weight of the situation pressed down on us even harder. The main conflict was no longer just about the scroll's content. Now it involved the present, the uncertainty of who might be watching our movements and why. We weren't sure if we were uncovering history or walking into something that hadn't ended at all. Jonah looked at the window blinds for the 5th time. Someone could be outside right now, he muttered. And we wouldn't know. Sam tried to lighten the mood, but even he couldn't hide the edge in his voice. Well, if they're tapping 3 times, maybe they want to say hello. But no one laughed. Instead, we kept working even though our hands shook each time we turned a page or pressed play on a recording. The deeper we dove into the scroll's world, the more it felt like its secrets weren't trapped in the past. They were leaking into the present, shaping the shadows around us. At one point, I caught Nadia staring at the He Watches parchment as if trying to understand the person who wrote it. Do you think they were being followed too? She asked quietly. Do you think they felt the same way we do right now? Yes, I said without thinking. I think they did. And that's what scared us most. The past wasn't just echoing. It was repeating. The tension in the room didn't fade, it grew heavier with every passing hour. We were no longer working on a simple discovery. We were living inside a story that felt like it was folding over us, layer by layer. Each new detail from the scroll connected to something happening right in front of us, as if time itself had decided to line up the past and present in a way we couldn't escape. By late evening, the lights in our workspace felt too bright. Every shadow on the wall looked suspicious. Every thud from the hallway made all of us jump. The scroll rested on the table, but none of us dared unroll more of it. The words we'd already read were enough to fill our minds with questions that had no safe answers. The phrase, "he watches," replayed endlessly in my thoughts. Jonah kept checking the window even though the blinds were fully shut. Sam sat close to the door, tapping it lightly with the edge of a pen, as if listening for any difference in sound. Nadia hovered over the audio files again, trying to isolate the tapping to see if a clear pattern emerged. But it was faint and distorted, as if whoever made the sound didn't want it fully understood. "I keep thinking about the writer," she whispered, eyes fixed on the screen. "What if they tried to warn us through time? Like they knew anyone who touched this story would attract attention." "That's impossible," Sam said, though his voice didn't hold confidence. "It's not like someone from centuries ago could predict us finding their scroll." "Then how do you explain the figure?" she asked. "Or the cave? Or the caretaker acting like he wanted to run the moment we opened that box?" Sam had no answer. None of us did. We decided to regroup and go through everything from the beginning, every detail we'd captured, every note we'd written, every moment that made us uneasy. We needed to understand the conflict clearly before we could take another step forward. We started with the scroll again. The middle portion held a sequence of events describing how the writer noticed strange movements around important locations. Groups gathering late at night, people exchanging information in the shadows, a growing sense of fear among the locals. The writer mentioned seeing the man with the covered face, observing different meetings from a distance. He never intervened, never spoke, but he always seemed to know where to be. That detail hit us harder now. It was exactly how our mystery figure behaved, silent, still, always in the right place at the right time. Jonah leaned over the table, pointing to one line of faded ink. "Look here." The writer said the man appeared most often when someone was close to uncovering the truth. "Whatever that means. What if the truth is the scroll itself?" I said. "What if the reason the writer hid this was because someone didn't want the story told? And that someone still doesn't," Nadia whispered. She wasn't wrong. From the caretaker's warning to the figure near the ruins, everything felt connected. It was like the conflict from the writer's time had never ended. It had simply shifted to a new generation of people who tried to uncover it. Sam didn't speak for a while. He just stared at the scroll, his fingers tightening around the pen he still held. Finally he said, "There's something else. Something we haven't talked about." He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. "When we were driving back earlier, I noticed something in the side mirror." He handed the phone to me. On the screen was a photo he'd taken, not very clear but clear enough. A dark silhouette stood on the edge of the hillside behind us. The same height, the same shape, the same stillness. Was the figure. "How long has he been following us?" Nadia asked, barely above a whisper. "Since the ruins," Sam said. "Maybe longer." A heavy silence settled in. We weren't imagining this. The conflict wasn't just ancient, it was alive. And it was closing in. We turned to the rest of our footage and audio again, searching for patterns we might have missed. That's when Nadia found something else, something buried deep in the cave recording. When she filtered out the wind and adjusted the frequency, the tapping sounded clearer. 3 taps. Then a pause. Then 2 taps. Then 3 again. "It's not random," she said. "Someone was sending a message." "What message?" Jonah asked. "I'm not sure, but it feels like a pattern from old communication methods. Maybe a signal to warn others." The idea that someone might have been signaling from outside the cave, while watching us, made the room feel colder. If the tapping was a warning, then who was it meant for? And what were they warning them about? As the night deepened, the atmosphere thickened. The tension peaked when the power suddenly flickered. The overhead lights dimmed for half a second, then came back brighter than before. It shouldn't have scared us, but it did. We looked at each other, waiting to see if the power would go out completely. It didn't, but the moment it flickered, I felt something shift outside the room. A presence. A weight. "It might be nothing," Sam said, though he clearly didn't believe it. We agreed to check the hallway together. When we stepped into the corridor, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The building felt empty, even though we knew other residents lived on the floor. The elevator numbers weren't moving. No TVs echoed behind doors. No footsteps. Just stillness. We walked slowly, checking each end of the hallway. Nothing. No shadows. No figure. But when we turned back toward our workspace, something small caught my eye. Something lying on the floor near the door. It was a thin strip of parchment. My stomach dropped. Nadia picked it up carefully, hands trembling. The parchment looked newer than the ancient scroll, but older than anything we handled today. The edges were rough, uneven. And across the center, written in dark ink, were 3 simple words. Do not continue. No signature. No explanation. Just the message. We stared at it in disbelief. Someone had slipped this under our door while we were inside the workspace. That meant someone had been watching us closely enough to know exactly when we were all distracted. Jonah's voice shook for the first time. This is a threat. Or another warning, Nadia said. Maybe from someone who doesn't want us hurt. But even that idea didn't comfort us. A warning meant danger. And danger meant we were getting close to something someone didn't want revealed. We hurried back inside, locking the door behind us. The air in the room felt electric, like every moment was leading toward something none of us were prepared for. The main conflict, whatever it was, had reached into our present lives and wrapped itself around us. Sam looked at the door. They want us to stop. Which means we're closer than we think, I said. Nadia held the new parchment against the light, her expression mixed with fear and determination. Whatever's behind this, whoever's watching, they know what we're about to uncover. Jonah swallowed hard. And they're scared of it. We sat around the table, surrounded by ancient secrets, modern warnings, unanswered questions, and a presence we could feel in every corner of the room. All the threads of the conflict, past and present, were pulling tight. And as we unrolled the last unread part of the scroll, we realized the climax was waiting just beyond the next line. The final section of the scroll felt heavier than the rest, as if the parchment itself carried the weight of something the writer had been terrified to put into words. We unrolled it slowly, expecting a continuation of the writer's memories, but instead, the first line stopped all of us cold. I'm not the only one who writes. The ink was darker here, the handwriting slightly different, as if someone else had added to the scroll long after the original writer. The strokes were sharper, rushed, like they were written in fear or desperation. Nadia glanced at us before reading the next line softly, almost as if she was afraid the room might react. They follow those who seek the truth. If you read this, then they have found you too. Sam exhaled a shaky breath. Someone else added this. Someone closer to our time, maybe? It's a second writer, Jonah said. Another eyewitness, but of the aftermath. The idea hit hard. This wasn't just one person from the past warning us. It was 2 people from 2 different periods, both leaving messages for whoever touched this story next. The conflict wasn't a straight line, it was layered across time. But the next lines brought a twist none of us were ready for. Do not trust the watchers, but fear the imitator more. Imitator. The word felt wrong in every possible way. It didn't match the tone of the first writer. It didn't match the hints we'd been uncovering. It introduced something new, something worse. Who or what is the imitator? Nadia whispered. We scanned the remaining section quickly, but the second writer didn't explain further. It was like they expected the reader to already understand what the imitator was. Or maybe they didn't have time to say more. Before we could make sense of it, Sam's laptop chimed. A notification popped up, our motion alert camera feed from the workspace entrance. We had set it up earlier just in case someone tried to slip another message under our door. Sam clicked play. At first, it showed nothing but the hallway, empty, still, silent. Then, at the very edge of the frame, a shadow slid into view. Not a whole person. Just part of a silhouette, like someone leaning just far enough to check if the cameras were still running. The figure didn't fully step into the frame. But what made our skin crawl was the angle of the head, tilted slightly, exactly like the figure from the ruins. So, watching. But then, in the last few seconds of the clip, something else happened, something impossible to explain. Another silhouette appeared behind the first. For a split second, the 2 shapes overlapped, one fading into the other as if they shared the same outline. Then the second one straightened and moved away while the first remained in place. It wasn't like 2 people crossing paths. It was like one figure splitting into 2. Or one reflecting the other. None of us spoke. The room felt colder than before. That can't be real, Jonah whispered. People don't move like that. Maybe it's a glitch, Sam said, but his voice was weak. Could be a camera delay. But we all knew it wasn't a glitch. The recording wasn't distorted. It was clean. Whatever happened, the camera captured it exactly. Nadia replayed it, zooming in, slowing it down frame by frame. The silhouettes didn't blur. They didn't glitch. The second figure simply emerged as if stepping out of the other's shadow. Imitator, she whispered. What if that's what the second writer meant? Someone, or something, mimicking the watcher? The word echoed through the room like a warning we were only just beginning to understand. The Watcher wasn't our only problem anymore. There was something else. Something that followed the Watcher or copied it or used its shape for its own purpose. "We need to leave," Jonah said. He paced toward the door but stopped before unlocking it. What if they're waiting? Fear prickled along my spine. The warning under the door. The tapping at the cave. The silhouette splitting in the hallway. Someone, or something, knew exactly where we were and how far we'd gotten. "We can't run without understanding what we're running from," Sam said. "We need more clues." I turned back to the scroll, scanning the final lines again. At the bottom, almost invisible under the faded ink, was a symbol. Not a letter. Not a word. A mark. 3 lines. Pause. 2 lines. Pause. 3 lines. The tapping, Nadia breathed. "It matches the pattern." The scroll held the same rhythm we heard at the cave entrance, which meant the second writer had used the same method to pass warnings centuries apart. It wasn't random. It was a code shared across time. But then, something even stranger caught my eye. Below the symbol, in faint, almost invisible ink, was a final sentence. Not written by the first writer. And not the second either. It looked newer than both, too new. The ink hadn't fully blended with the parchment fibers yet. Someone had added it recently. "Before you decide your next step, know this. One of you has already been approached." The words punched through the air like a thunderclap. We looked at each other, fear tightening every muscle. "Approached?" Sam said. "By who?" "Or by what?" Jonah murmured. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a fact. A fact we hadn't realized until now. Then Nadia's face went pale. She stepped back, her voice hollow. "Wait, when we were at the cave, before you all came in, I thought I heard someone whisper my name. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The second plot twist hit us all at once. Whoever, or whatever, had been following us wasn't just watching. It had already made contact. Not with all of us. Just one. And as that realization settled into the room, the stakes changed completely. The scroll wasn't just a relic. The mystery was no longer just historical. The Watchers weren't the only danger. The imitator was somewhere close. And now one of us may have already been marked. The wind outside the archive room felt stronger than before, almost as if the building itself could sense the pressure closing in on us. Dr. Hale stood frozen beside the table, her hands slightly shaking, not from fear but from the weight of what she had just seen on the scroll. Omar paced near the window, staring into the distance like he was trying to understand how everything we thought we knew had suddenly become uncertain. And I just stood there, unable to move, replaying those last lines in my mind. They didn't answer anything. They created new questions, deeper questions, ones that reached into the heart of the mystery we'd been chasing. The scroll described a moment of sudden darkness, but it wasn't the kind that comes from an eclipse or a cloud blocking the sun. The way the Eyewitness wrote it made the darkness feel alive, almost intentional. But that wasn't what unsettled us. It was the final sentence, half-faded, telling of something, or someone, seen in the moments after the event, something the writer admitted he couldn't explain. But the scroll ended abruptly, like the author was interrupted, leaving only confusion behind. Dr. Hale finally exhaled and said she needed to compare the handwriting from the new fragment with the samples from earlier in the scroll. She tried to sound calm, but her voice wavered. She couldn't hide the tension anymore. Omar leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and asked the question none of us wanted to focus on yet. How did the scroll suddenly include a fragment we had never seen until today? Nothing about our process allowed for accidental discoveries like that. Every piece had been catalogued months ago. Yet this new fragment was attached perfectly, almost seamlessly merging into the old parchment. We didn't want to admit it, but the possibility that someone had planted it crossed all our minds. The timing was too strange. The details too sharp. The implications too heavy. But who would plant something so subtle and expect us to believe it? And more importantly, why? I walked closer to the table and looked at the scroll again. The ink shimmered under the lamp. Even though it was old, the writing felt urgent, like the author's hand trembled while writing. There was something personal in the strokes, something that made the account feel human, not fabricated. It didn't read like a legend or myth. It read like fear. Before any of us could speak again, a loud vibration broke the silence. Omar checked his phone and the color drained from his face. He didn't explain immediately, just stared at the screen in disbelief. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. The museum's security team had reported that someone tried to access the archive 30 minutes before we arrived. They didn't break in, but the attempt was serious enough that alarms had been triggered. Yet no one thought to tell us until now. It didn't make sense. Dr. Hale's eyes widened, and I could tell she was already putting pieces together in her mind. If someone was trying to access the archive before we got there, then whoever it was might have been after the scroll, or might have been the one who placed the new fragment inside. Maybe they needed us to find it. Maybe that was the goal all along. We tried to reassure ourselves that maybe it was just a random event, but none of us believed that. The timing matched too precisely. Too deliberately. I suggested we take the scroll upstairs to the controlled study room, thinking it would feel safer with more light and space. But when Omar reached for the table, he stopped as if something invisible held him back. He said quietly that the scroll didn't feel right. Not haunted, not cursed, just not stable. Like moving it might trigger something we didn't understand. Dr. Hale stared at him, confused, but even she hesitated before lifting the frame around the parchment. We were all speaking less now, letting the silence carry the weight of our thoughts. I felt the tension rising, not because of anything supernatural, but because we were in a race we didn't understand yet. Someone was ahead of us, someone who knew the scroll's value before we did. That alone pushed everything into dangerous territory. As we prepared to move the scroll, Dr. Hale carefully lifted it and placed it inside a protective case. But as she closed the lid, something strange happened. Not dramatic, but unsettling enough to stop our breath for a moment. The fragment, the new one, briefly shifted in color under the light, as if it were made of a slightly different material than the rest. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but we all caught it. Omar stepped closer and whispered that the ink on the new fragment looked fresh under UV reflection. Not new enough to be modern, but fresher than the surrounding text. That didn't mean forgery. It could simply mean the ink came from a different mixture, or the writer used a different batch. But combined with everything else, it only deepened the conflict. Dr. Hale shook her head, saying we needed more tests before jumping to conclusions, but even she sounded unsure. Every answer seemed to lead to another question. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the story inside the scroll, the ancient eyewitness account, felt like it was pulling us deeper, inviting us to uncover more than we were ready for. We brought the case upstairs, and the moment we entered the study room, a soft hum filled the air. The machines and monitors flickered slightly. Omar frowned and checked the power supply, finding nothing wrong. I felt a chill, but I told myself it was just the old wiring. Still, the timing made it impossible to ignore. Dr. Hale placed the scroll under the magnifier. She leaned in, scanning the last few lines written by the anonymous eyewitness. There was a phrase we hadn't noticed earlier, a faint one beneath the surface ink. It wasn't part of the main sentence. It was more like a hidden note, pressed lightly into the surface without ink. As if the writer was trying not to be seen. We froze when Dr. Hale read it aloud under her breath. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a request. It was a single line that sounded like someone begging for secrecy, almost pleading with whoever might one day read it. And it ended with a name, one none of us recognized. Before we could process what it meant, the lights flickered again, this time more violently. Omar grabbed the side of the desk to steady himself. Outside the glass windows, the hallway lights shut off one by one, like something was moving through the building. I didn't say anything. No one did. We just stared at the dark hall, each of us thinking the same thing. We weren't alone in the building. And whoever was with us might be looking for the same secret the scroll had been trying to protect for nearly 2,000 years. The hallway stayed dark, silent in a way that made every breath feel too loud. The three of us stood frozen in the study room, the glow of the desk lamp the only light left. Dr. Hale slowly straightened from the magnifier, her eyes still locked on the faint carved line in the scroll. Omar moved closer to the window, trying to see if anyone was actually out there, but the darkness swallowed everything. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, and yet some part of me knew this moment had been building for a long time. Something shifted outside, a soft footstep, not rushed but confident. Someone who knew this building well. Omar motioned for us to stay quiet. But then the door handle twitched, just once, just enough to tell us we weren't imagining anything. We didn't have a weapon, not even anything close. All we had was the scroll, and the sense that whoever was outside wanted it badly enough to break in. The handle stopped moving, replaced by a calm voice on the other side. A voice that sounded tired, almost sad. It simply said, "Please? I'm not here to hurt you." We recognized it immediately. It was the museum's night archivist, Mr. Rafiq. He rarely spoke to anyone, always working alone, always avoiding crowds. He was the kind of person no one noticed because he preferred it that way. But hearing him now at this hour felt wrong. Omar opened the door halfway, just enough to see him. Rafiq stood in the hallway holding a small leather case, looking shaken but not threatening. He stepped inside quietly, his eyes going straight to the scroll as if he'd expected to see it. Dr. Hale asked him what he was doing in the building after hours, and he didn't hesitate. He said he came because he knew we would find the hidden line today. That made no sense. We hadn't told anyone about the new fragment. We hadn't even understood the hidden line ourselves yet. But Rafik explained that he had spent years studying ancient writings, always searching for something he said belonged to his family's past. His ancestors were once caretakers of a small group of early record keepers, people who documented significant events but kept their identities hidden for safety. According to him, one of those ancestors wrote the very scroll we were studying. And the faint carved message, the one hidden beneath the ink, was meant as a clue to confirm the writer's identity to future generations. The name carved into the parchment was the same name Rafik carried. The room went silent. Not because we didn't believe him, but because the timing, the secrecy, the break-in attempt, it suddenly all connected. Rafik wasn't trying to steal the scroll. He was trying to protect it. He said he learned weeks ago that a private collector had been offering large sums to anyone willing to smuggle artifacts out of the museum. He'd overheard people talking about our scroll in particular. And tonight, right before we arrived, he caught someone trying to get into the archive. They escaped when he approached, but he feared they would come back. The tension in the room eased for a moment, replaced by a sudden urgency. If someone else was after the scroll, we didn't have much time. Dr. Hale asked him about the carved line, wanting to understand what it meant. Rafik leaned over the table, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the faint letters. He explained that the writer wasn't trying to reveal a hidden miracle or rewrite history. The message was simply a personal plea. The writer had witnessed a moment that shook him, something powerful, something he struggled to understand. Not supernatural, but deeply emotional and overwhelming. He wanted future readers to know he wrote the account honestly, without adding anything or exaggerating. The secrecy wasn't about hiding a mystical event. It was about the fear of being silenced for speaking truth. The scroll wasn't meant to shock people. It was meant to preserve a human moment of confusion, awe, and compassion. Hearing that brought a strange calm into the room. All the fear we'd built up, all the mystery we'd layered onto the scroll, it faded into something more real. The story mattered not because of dramatic secrets, but because it was a raw, human account from someone who lived through a historic moment. The conflict we'd been wrestling with, the authenticity, the meaning, the threat of tampering, finally settled. The scroll was real. The writer was real. And now, someone who had waited his entire life to find this connection stood in front of us, holding the final piece of the puzzle. We agreed to help protect the scroll and document everything properly before the museum opened in the morning. Rafik gave us the leather case he brought. It contained old notes from his family passed down for generations. Inside were small fragments of writing that matched the style of the carved message perfectly. It was the final confirmation we needed. But just when it felt like things were finally settling, another vibration rattled the room. This time it wasn't a phone. It was the building's emergency alert system, flashing silently on the hallway monitor. A motion sensor had picked up movement inside the archive room again. Omar checked the security feed on his tablet and his face tightened. The figure on the screen wasn't Rafik. It wasn't anyone we recognized. The person wore a hood, avoiding every camera on purpose as if they knew exactly where they were placed. They weren't panicking. They weren't rushing. They were searching. And then the figure looked directly into one of the cameras, straight into the lens, almost as if they knew we were watching. Their face stayed hidden, but their hand lifted, revealing something small and familiar. The missing binding thread from our scroll. That was impossible. We had it the whole time. Yet the one in their hand looked identical, same age, same texture. The figure held it up for a moment, then closed their hand around it and walked toward the exit, disappearing before security could intercept them. We all stared at the monitor, speechless. The scroll had been authentic. Rafik's story proved that. The carved line was genuine. But someone else had another fragment, one that matched ours perfectly. Which meant the eyewitness didn't write just one account. There were more scrolls. And someone out there already had one. For a few seconds after the hooded figure vanished from the security feed, none of us moved. The realization hit slowly, like a door opening to a hallway we hadn't even known existed. If another scroll truly existed, then everything we thought we were protecting, everything we believed was unique, was only part of a much larger story. And whoever held that other fragment already knew more than we did. Omar snapped out of it first and rushed toward the hallway, but Dr. Hale stopped him, reminding him that we had no idea what the person was capable of. Rafik closed the study room door gently, almost too gently, as if he understood something we didn't. He told us that if the figure had wanted to hurt anyone, they would have done it already. They didn't come for us, they came to send a message. I didn't want to believe that. It felt too deliberate, too theatrical. Why show themselves at all? Why reveal the fragment? But it became clearer the longer we stood there. The figure wasn't stealing anything. They were proving they had something valuable too. Maybe something older. Maybe something more complete. Dr. Hale returned to the table and looked down at our scroll, her fingers brushing the edge of the protective case. She said softly that maybe this wasn't about taking or hiding anything, maybe it was about pushing us forward. As though someone wanted us to keep looking. That thought alone shifted everything. Instead of fear, a strange determination settled in. We had spent weeks trying to uncover the truth behind this one scroll. Now the possibility of another document, a companion account, felt like the final piece of a puzzle we didn't even know was missing. But before any of us could say what came next, the building lights flickered back on. The emergency alert stopped flashing. The hallways brightened as if nothing had ever happened. Security guards rushed toward our floor moments later, but by then the figure was long gone. When the guards left, Rafik opened his leather case again. Inside, tucked behind the family notes, was a folded piece of parchment so fragile he held it with both hands. He said he hadn't shown it before because he wasn't sure if it mattered. But after what we saw, he knew it was time. He unfolded it slowly. The parchment wasn't a scroll, just a small preserved corner, almost like it had been torn from a larger page. The handwriting wasn't identical to our scroll's author, but it was close. And the date marked at the top matched the same era. As soon as the paper hit the table, Dr. Hale leaned forward and whispered that she recognized the style. It wasn't a continuation, it looked like a companion account written by someone close to the original Eyewitness. The words on it were faint, but one sentence stood out clearly, written with more pressure than the rest. I was not alone that day. It felt like the air left the room. That one line solved the confusion we'd been circling from the start. The eyewitness wasn't the only person who recorded what they saw. Multiple people might have documented their experiences, each from a different angle, each with different emotional impressions. And somewhere, someone else held another piece of that testimony. The climax of everything we'd been chasing didn't explode in some dramatic revelation. Instead, it settled into something deeper, an understanding that history wasn't written by one voice but by many. The mystery wasn't about uncovering a supernatural secret. It was about realizing how many human perspectives had been lost, scattered, or hidden through time. But just when the relief washed over us, just when we thought we finally understood the bigger picture, the twist came in the simplest, quietest way. Rafik turned the fragile parchment over. None of us expected anything to be on the back. But there were faint marks, indentations, not words, not letters. When held under the lamp, the marks formed a simple symbol. A circle with two small intersecting lines at the bottom. It looked almost like a seal. But not one from any historical period we recognized. Dr. Hale grabbed her tablet and searched through all the catalogs and archives she could access. Nothing matched. No ancient group had used it. No scribe guilds. No early communities. Nothing. But Rafik swallowed hard and said he had seen it before. His grandfather had carved that same symbol on a wooden box kept hidden in their old storage room. He never explained its meaning. He only said it belonged to the silent witnesses, a name passed down without context. A name his family believed was only symbolic, not literal. We all stared at the symbol, our earlier resolution unraveling with every second. If the symbol on the parchment matched the one his family protected, then his ancestors were part of something much larger than just recording an event. They were part of a group dedicated to preserving pieces of eyewitness history quietly, secretly, across generations. And if that was true, then the hooded figure wasn't just someone trying to steal a scroll. They might have been part of that same lineage. Or worse, part of a splintered group trying to gather all the remaining accounts before anyone else could. The story had finally reached its climax, the truth revealed enough to calm the chaos, but that symbol changed everything. The resolution we felt only moments earlier cracked open to reveal a new layer of mystery. Omar stepped back from the table and said in a steady voice that the person who visited the archive tonight didn't come to take anything. They came to warn us we weren't just studying history anymore. We had stepped into the middle of a living story, one that wasn't finished. And someone out there wanted to make sure we kept following the trail. But someone else might want to stop us before we found the rest. The room was heavy with silence after Omar's words. We all stared at the symbol on the parchment, trying to absorb what it meant. The scrolls, the fragments, the hidden messages, the watchers and the imitator, all of it suddenly made sense in a way that was both reassuring and unsettling. The eyewitness accounts weren't just isolated stories. They were pieces of a living history preserved across generations, carefully safeguarded by families like Rafiq's. They weren't trying to hide miracles or supernatural events, they were trying to protect the truth from being lost, distorted, or exploited. Rafiq carefully lifted the new parchment and placed it alongside the scroll we had discovered in the ruins. "These are fragments of the same moment," he said quietly. "From different perspectives, different writers, all witnessing the same event. And all surviving in pieces because the world wasn't always ready to hear them." Dr. Hale nodded, tracing her finger across the carved line on our scroll. "That's why the messages seemed so cryptic. It wasn't meant for just anyone. It was meant for someone who could understand the weight of what they were holding. Someone responsible." I realized then that we had been given more than just a story. We had been given a responsibility. These scrolls, these fragments, weren't meant to be sensationalized or sold to the highest bidder. They were meant to preserve human experience, raw and honest. The fear, the awe, the doubt, the scrolls captured all of it. And we were now part of that chain of witnesses, tasked with protecting the truth while sharing it in the right way. Omar leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair. "So, the hooded figure, they weren't here to steal anything. They were part of the same lineage, just like Rafiq said." He paused. "They wanted to make sure we didn't misstep." Dr. Hale added, "And that's why the alerts, the tapping, the warnings, they weren't threats. They were protective measures. Whoever followed us wanted to guide us, not harm us." Nadia, who had been quiet for most of the evening, spoke up. "It's strange. All the fear, all the suspense we felt, it was real. But it wasn't about danger, it was about trust. About learning to see the truth without letting it destroy you." We spent the next few hours carefully documenting everything. Each fragment, each line, each carved message. Rafiq explained the family history, the careful preservation of these accounts, and the silent dedication that had carried the eyewitnesses' memories across centuries. Every detail added depth to the story and gave context to the events we had witnessed. The shadowed figure, the tapping, the threats under the door. It all made sense in the light of history. By midnight, we had organized all the fragments, labeled every piece and recorded every observation. The sense of urgency was replaced with a quiet reverence. For the first time, we weren't just chasing a story, we were understanding it, connecting with it, and preserving it. The scrolls were no longer mysterious artifacts. They were human voices reaching across time. Rafiq closed his leather case and looked at each of us. "You have to understand what you've discovered is rare. Most eyewitness accounts from this period are lost. Many were destroyed because the world wasn't ready. But this one survived because people believed in truth, even when it was inconvenient." Dr. Hale nodded. "And now it's our responsibility to ensure it continues to survive. That we respect it, protect it, and share it responsibly." There was a moment of silence. Each of us absorbed the weight of what he said. The thrill of discovery, the tension of being watched, the fear of imitators, all of it had led to this moment. The conflicts, the suspense, the mysterious figure, it all had meaning now. Not random, not chaotic, but purposeful. I finally asked the question that had been in my mind since the beginning: do we tell the world? Or do we keep this hidden? Rafiq's eyes softened. "You can share it, but carefully. The story itself, the witness account of that day, is powerful. It teaches humility, faith, and the weight of human observation. But it's not a story to be sensationalized. If it's shared correctly, it honors those who wrote it and those who lived through it. If it's mishandled, it loses its meaning." We agreed. The scrolls would be preserved, documented, and shared with care. Not as a sensational revelation, not as a viral story, but as a window into the past, into human experience, and into the responsibility of those who uncover history. As we packed up for the night, the tension that had followed us since the cave began to lift. The watchers were gone. The imitator, whatever its purpose, had been revealed as a cautionary presence, a shadow of guidance rather than harm. We were safe. And yet, there was a lingering sense that history, even when carefully preserved, always had the potential to surprise those who uncovered it. Before leaving, I turned back to the scroll one last time. The carved line, the faint hidden message, the symbol of the silent witnesses, they all seemed to glow under the soft light, not with supernatural power but with human significance. The scroll had survived centuries because of careful hands, vigilant hearts, and people willing to protect truth at all costs. And now, in a small way, we were part of that legacy. Rafiq walked us to the door and handed each of us a small, folded note. Inside was a message written in careful, almost deliberate handwriting. "Remember, the story survives in those who respect it." It was a quiet reminder that while the main conflict had been resolved, the scroll's authenticity confirmed, the protective lineage understood, the imitator revealed, the responsibility now rested with us. Knowledge without care could be dangerous. Truth without respect could be lost. As we stepped out into the cool night, the city lights glowing in the distance, we realized something else. The story of the crucifixion, seen through the eyes of someone who lived it, wasn't just history. It was human experience. It was fear, hope, doubt, and courage, all preserved in fragile parchment and ink. And we were witnesses too, not just to history but to the weight of responsibility that comes with discovering it. Omar let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Nadia smiled faintly, exhausted but satisfied. Dr. Hale adjusted her coat and looked up at the stars. "We did the right thing," she said. "Not just for the scroll but for the story itself." And in that moment, the suspense, the danger, and the mystery we had felt for weeks felt like lessons more than threats. The scrolls had brought fear and tension, but they had also brought understanding, clarity, and a reminder of the power of human voices across time. As we walked toward the car, I couldn't help but glance back at the museum. The archive doors stood quietly closed, guarding the fragments we had spent so long uncovering. The shadows were gone, the imitator unseen. And yet, I knew that history has a way of resurfacing, of demanding attention when it's ready. The scroll had told its story. But like all stories of human experience, it had layers still waiting to be uncovered, lessons still waiting to be learned. We drove away in silence, the city stretching out before us. The mystery had been solved. The conflict had been resolved. But the weight of the story, the witness account, and the responsibility we now carried stayed with us. It was a reminder that the past isn't just something to study, it's something to honor. And in that quiet, reflective drive, the scroll rested safely in the back seat, fragile but eternal, carrying the voice of an eyewitness across centuries. We had discovered it, understood it, and preserved it. But the story itself, like all great human experiences, would continue to live in those who were willing to witness it carefully and respectfully. The tension had ended. The mystery had been revealed. And the lesson remained: truth, courage, and the human voice are the most powerful witnesses of all.